All right, everyone. You remember Linda Sarsour? She's like, on one end, it's okay 'cause she's like a Palestinian activist, and I think everyone gets abused over in the Middle East, so that's okay. She's like a rabid post-third wave feminist, social justice warrior. She famously claimed that another woman who was criticizing her should not be allowed to have a vagina, I guess should have it cut off or something, I don't know, female genital mutilation or something. As opposed to male genital mutilation, by the way. She was the Women's March ideological head, and she gets all sorts of accolades from these political groups that are like women's rights and stuff. And it turns out it looks like she was shielding one of the people there, one of the co-workers of one of her female workers. Female worker comes to her and says, "Well, I'm being harassed and basically perved on by this dude." And Sarsour attacked her for this, said, no, he's a good Muslim. He always goes to the mosque. He's religious and moral, and he would never do such a thing. I think we've isolated the fact that Linda Sarsour is in fact exactly what I told people she was. Even people on the right, they said, no, she's not an opportunist. She actually believes this weird stuff. She's been corrupted by rad femme ideology. And I said, no, she hasn't. She's using it as a platform to get famous and to get money and to have power. Because that's what opportunists do. They glom on usually to the fringe of a movement. If you look at the MRA stuff, for the flip side. Standard MRAs get relatively little attention. And yet they're the ones that make sense because they're hey, there's a huge discrepancy in alimony and child support payments and shit. And who gets custody of the kids sort of stuff. And we're trying to address that. There shouldn't be that discrepancy within the judicial system. It's obviously a financial reason because the state gets to tax, some of those proceeds. So it usually wants to award that to the female because the male typically has a higher paying job in many arrangements. That's an MRA. That's sane. It's also something I've never had a problem with because, yeah, there's a discrepancy there, statistically speaking, that probably shouldn't exist. Then you get MGTOW, and MGTOW is basically, oh, screw women, scratch my pits and hang out with the bros. It has nothing to do with bromance, offshoot stuff that's a little bit further out. Yeah, it's totally normal to wear high heels and kiss with your bros and stuff. That's basically, I'm making a joke, by the way. Before any MGTOW people jump down my throat, I realize some of you've been actively abused, whereas the MRAs are looking at statistics maybe from afar. Maybe you did get hit by alimony payments or something. I still disagree with the message of MGTOW. And then you've got the fringe of MGTOW, which is really I wouldn't be joking if I said that sort of stuff. It's just totally whacked out. And the people who are visible within that fringe of the further out part of MGTOW, they are necessarily going to generally be opportunists. They're either going to be a total zealot or an opportunist. Religion, it works the same way. Who gets the most attention? Is it the kindly old priest that gives you words of wisdom? Or is it that young fanatic priest who says, Jesus Christ will solve this possession issue. There be witches around. This is also how social and moral panics begin, by the way. There's a little secret about the world. It doesn't matter whether it's a political or social movement. So when Linda Sarsour sits there and rambles red-faced about how, the evil chauvinist, check your fucking privilege, blocking people on Twitter for daring to, say, well, some statistic you cited is wrong. And then she talks about women having their vaginas removed for daring to speak out against her. I'm not surprised that it turns out that she's really not an advocate for women at all. Because it's exactly what I would have predicted, and in fact did. I say the same thing generally. I allege that there are a lot of people like that. Now, of course, disclaimer, I'm not making this claim in an objective sense. I'm just putting this out there, but there are people that, in my opinion, are probably opportunistic too. Al Sharpton, Jesse Jackson, Ann Coulter, David Duke, to name a few. Yes, these people I do believe that about. I think that even among independent sort of movements, look for who says things and they're really out there, they try to heap attention on themselves by saying stuff that sounds like it's fringe even to a fringe movement. There's your prime suspect for opportunism. A Sarkeesian, somebody like that. It happens, and the more rabid the movement tends to be, the more opportunists you can accommodate too, because their fundraising capabilities and their ability to browbeat an ideological opponent and their core message carried by core fans that are rabid like them will be larger. For instance, 1,000 people well motivated can overcome 1,000,000 people that are kind of lazy about what they believe in. A small group of fanatics is much more powerful than a large group of people who have more sanity. It's an unfortunate truth in this world. So when you get these movements, you've got to understand that it's a tiny minority even of that movement that's actually fringe, but they can command the whole movement because they are the ones that will sit there shitposting for 12 hours. They are the ones that will attempt to openly defame other people. They're the ones that will get violent and attempt to silence opponents through violence. They're the ones that dog whistle for violence. We see this on Twitter all the time. We've got pundits like Lamestream, 7-figure journalist-enabled pundits that dog whistle violence now. We've had it said about women's rights too. Oh, women's rights, I can't remember who said it, but it was like, women's rights aren't moving fast enough, so, we need to switch tactics or something. I think it was Jordan Peterson was calling her out and saying, what are you actually suggesting? I saw it on my Twitter timeline or homepage, whatever the fuck they call it. That he had responded to him like, oh, yeah, sounds like a dog whistle. And keep in mind that those that have been duped by a fanatic movement like that will never actually notice the propaganda within their own movement, like they've been brainwashed. That's how cults work. They notice everyone else's brainwashing, but they can't see their own. That's how they're controlled. See, people who actually utilize propaganda usually are themselves. They've made themselves more immune to it. Although, keep in mind that it's easiest to steal from a thief because, of course, the thief thinks they're the ones that do the stealing. They never think about the opposite possibility. Got to keep that in mind, too. That's why you get some of these opportunists outed once in a while as the scumbags that they tend to be. But I said she probably was, and I've maintained this for years about all these others, like Al Sharpton and Jesse Jackson. They don't care about Black Lives. I don't give a crap about BLM or any of these things, but they'll glom onto them and speak in loud, lofty terms about how if you just donate more money, then the movement will achieve its goals. It's never going to achieve its goals, dude. It's a fringe movement. Most people reject it. But they're willing to make a 6-figure total off of your misery and your own delusions. David Duke, what's David Duke accomplishing by running his podcast? Are his ideologies actually going to take hold because David Duke comes out and talks about them? No, it's not going to happen. When Ann Coulter talks about, some issue, and she takes, the most deliberately fringe position, which is why I have my suspicions about what she actually believes in. What do you think she's doing when she does that? Is that for, hey, I've got a book, by the way, and I know that I can get more interviews and more people will retweet me if I put out really weird stuff? That, it doesn't have to even play up to your own fans. It can simply enrage your opponents, too. You get them enraged, they spread stuff around, and as long as it's not illegal or against the TOS of some specific site, hey, it's no loss to you. You look like a fanatic, you look like an ideologue, but you've just gotten a lot of attention. There's no such thing as negative attention, unless it's going to get you, thrown in a cell or something, right? Well, that's what they do. I'm well aware, by the way, this is another truth. I'm well aware of the fact that those of us, even in independent content creation, those that don't use clickbait, like clickbait titles, sensationalist bullshit descriptions, oh, the end of the world is coming, please help spread the message, spread my video, make it viral, but, that's not what I want to save the world, YouTube videos and do that. Those that use the clickbait and the sensationalism and stuff like that, and talk about stuff that they don't even necessarily really know anything about, but they're really popular topics, and they just constantly harangue on them. And they co-opt some social movement. It's like someone says, oh yeah, I'm a feminist and I'm more feminist than you, so you should help me spread word about how feminist I am. These people tend to be, not always, but tend to be opportunists. They know that they're lying to people. Otherwise, they really are lunatics, usually. Again, when Ann Coulter does it, I say, oh, she's probably, I think she might be just a satirist with no real political views at all. She even self-satires now. Like what she said about, oh, just being single and childless and, life sucks. It's like, what? It doesn't sound like something that a conservative pundit tends to dwell upon. You sound like you're operating a Tumblr page. Did you post it on the wrong site? I think so, probably. And there are people, like superfans, that have been brainwashed by the opportunists. They'll come down on me for pointing out this stupidity. They'll come down on me when I say that there's a fringe of MGTOW that's totally lost its mind. Or there are radfems out there that are really whacked out, or Ann Coulter's probably lying to you. They won't even accept the message. If they're fans of the person, they defend them. And if they're not fans of the persons, they ignore the possibility of them being an opportunist because they're too busy attacking the ideology that the other person claims to represent. To see, they want to attack the ideology, so they'll just use them as a stand. And even if they kind of have an inkling that I'm right, they're not going to say anything like that because they don't want it to be true. They want a one-dimensional boogeyman caricature for whatever they ideologically oppose. It's almost self-propaganda. It's weird. It's like they're fooling themselves in a willful manner. Melinda Sarsour apparently enabled workplace violence. And again, it's just an allegation. But the original allegation almost then doesn't matter. It's the allegation of her reaction to another person bringing this up within the context of again, like a woman's organization. Wouldn't you think that'd be the place you'd take it most seriously? There are people, not to name names here, but I think we all know who I'm talking about. There are individuals who have sort of left the feminist thing behind, specifically because of how violent and opportunist some of these people have become. Thus opening up, and here's how a fringe movement dies, by the way. It opens up. Once it becomes fringe enough, reformers can come along, very visibly say, well, I'm going to morally grandstand, this is wrong now, I'm holier than thou, and I'm no longer part of that movement. They take chunks of it away with them, leaving that fringe core much smaller and weaker. Usually the mass migrates away from it. Like again, you'd think of what's happening right now with third wave feminism. It's dying. It's becoming less prevalent, finally. Haven't heard as much lately about MGTOW. Now, there's a reason for that. But MRA stuff, yeah, it's still a popular topic because the original concern that was formulated by these people makes sense. Just like the initial concern of earlier wave feminism, hey, women shouldn't be constantly harassed, they shouldn't be discriminated against. Yeah, well, no shit. I think it'd be hard to find anyone that disagrees with you, but when you bring in the check your privilege and the myth wage gap stuff and pink hair and glasses without, lenses in them, that's when your movement gets freaky. And it's okay to be freaky for a while, it gets you lots of attention, but then the opportunist comes, siphons, vampirizes the money and the productivity and the growth, while claiming the whole time that they're like the most wonderful person ever, and they're usually the most corrupt. When somebody holds themselves up like that on a pedestal, it usually means that they're the most corrupt. A televangelist rambling about, gay people, so evil, going to hell. And then they're like having gay orgies and stuff. Not the greatest example because I don't really care if they do that, but it does make them a hypocrite now, doesn't it? Or some anti-drug warrior who's smoking crack. The cop that comes in to lecture the school kids about how bad pot is actually growing pot in his garage. That sort of thing. It happens all the time. It's called projection. It happens constantly. And it's sad to see so many people duped into it too, because it's so elementary. It's like it's easy to see. All you have to do is look for people who hold themselves onto the fringe very, very visibly. They don't hide that fact. They say, well, I'm the more radical than you. 9 times out of 10, they're going to be lying to everyone. They're lying to you too if you oppose them. Like they're using the ideology to shield themselves. You'll attack the ideology because you're trying to bring it down most of the time, which is even funnier. Then they get outed as an opportunist, and of course those that had the ability to see through their charade, of course we are shown to be correct thereafter. But Sarsour, she said nutty things enough. I think even at some point, even a lot of her buddies started to, I think I'm going to stand a little further away from you because, when the rock drops on your head and your career is over, I don't want a bunch of that gravel getting onto my shoes. That's about all. Peace out.